column of fire blasted skyward from the carrier's forward deck, ripping apart steel and drowning the afternoon light in a violent plume of smoke. Why had the quiet South Pacific erupted into chaos? And what unseen actions had placed USS Wasp directly in a submarine's deadly sights? Only moments earlier, the day had worn a mask of deceptive calm, the kind that convinces even veteran sailors that danger lies somewhere far beyond the horizon. Beneath that shimmering surface, however, a Japanese submarine had already locked its firing solution onto the carrier. It was September 15, 1942, and Captain Forrest Sherman oversaw what seemed like a routine operational cycle after reinforcing Guadalcanal. Patrol aircraft had flown, recovered, and the ship settled into the grinding rhythm of another day in a long, exhausting war. Then a lookout's voice tore through the air, sharp, panicked, unforgettable. Torpedoes to starboard! 3 white wakes surged toward the carrier, converging like spears aimed straight at its heart. The attack on USS Wasp did not happen in a vacuum. It was the product of a Pacific War twisted by losses, gambles, and rapidly shifting naval doctrines. In early 1942, the United States found itself fighting a two-front war while still reeling from the devastation of Pearl Harbor. Despite these setbacks, American forces struck back with daring operations like the Doolittle Raid, shaking Japanese confidence even if the tactical impact was limited. Yet Japan still held a dangerous numerical advantage in carriers, aircraft, and trained naval aviators. The tide began to turn with the battles of the Coral Sea and Midway, 2 engagements that proved the aircraft carrier had replaced the battleship as the true capital ship of naval warfare. At Midway, Japan lost 4 frontline carriers, a catastrophic blow that shifted momentum to the Allies. Among the carriers that would carry America through this turning point was USS Wasp, a ship with a unique and compromised origin. Due to strict tonnage limits imposed by the Washington Naval Treaty, the U.S. Navy squeezed Wasp into the remaining allotted weight, resulting in a smaller, lighter, and far more vulnerable design. Although these limitations would one day become fatal weaknesses, Wasp entered the war with innovation on her side. She was the first U.S. carrier equipped with a deck edge elevator, speeding aircraft movement during high-tempo operations. For a Navy fighting to survive the Pacific's opening months, every advantage mattered. Steady, foreboding, tightening tension. In the wake of the Coral Sea and Midway battles, the U.S. Navy urgently redeployed USS Wasp to the Pacific, where the struggle for Guadalcanal was intensifying by the week. The carrier arrived just as American forces launched their first major offensive in the Solomon Islands, a campaign meant to halt Japanese expansion and secure a foothold for future operations. From the moment Wasp joined the South Pacific forces in early August, its presence became essential to maintaining air superiority over the new beachhead. On August 7, her aircraft roared into action, striking Japanese positions around Guadalcanal while escorting transports carrying Marines to the contested shore. But even as Wasp proved indispensable, the ship carried hidden weaknesses. The very compromises that had shaped her narrow hull and light armor now limited her speed and operational endurance. Mechanical issues forced her to pull back temporarily, causing her to miss the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, where the carrier Enterprise was heavily damaged. With Enterprise withdrawn, the entire task force grew vulnerable, and the loss of Saratoga to a torpedo strike on August 31st underscored how ruthlessly Japanese submarines patrolled these waters. By the end of the month, only 2 U.S. carriers, Wasp and the newly commissioned Hornet, remained in the region to defend the vital supply lines feeding the Guadalcanal front. The danger grew clearer when Captain Arthur Davis of Enterprise urged the task force to vary its routes and speeds to avoid predictable patterns. Despite the warning, the carriers continued operating along familiar tracks, an unintentional invitation to the Japanese submarines waiting patiently below. By the morning of September 15, USS Wasp had settled into what felt like a controlled, predictable rhythm, launching anti-submarine patrols, recovering aircraft, and repositioning for the long sweep back toward Guadalcanal. No one aboard realized that deep below the sunlit surface, Japanese submarine I-19 had already maneuvered into a perfect firing position. The carrier's crew had been at general quarters since before dawn, but by early afternoon, the atmosphere shifted into something almost comfortable, dangerous in hindsight. Between launches, the deck filled with heat shimmering off steel, while Wildcats and Dauntlesses refueled, rearmed, and cycled through the busy tempo of carrier operations. At 14:20, Wasp launched a fresh group of Wildcats and Dauntlesses, just as several returning aircraft began their recovery approach. The ship was mid-turn, preparing to reposition for wind, when a lookout spotted something no sailor ever wants to see: 3 torpedo wakes cutting toward the ship at terrifying speed. Captain Sherman's voice snapped through the ship, "Hard starboard!" But the torpedoes were already too close. In a split second that felt impossibly stretched, the first torpedo slammed into the ship just forward of the island. The blast lifted the massive carrier out of the water, hurling men off their feet and ripping open the hull with catastrophic force. The second and third torpedoes struck only seconds later, each impact hammering the carrier with brutal precision. On the hangar deck, aircraft were ripped from their moorings, dropped violently onto others below, or crushed under the sudden collapse of landing gear. The combined explosions turned the interior of the ship into a shaking, deafening furnace. But the torpedoes that missed Wasp continued on, charging through the formation toward the screening ships. One tore into the destroyer O'Brien, severing its bow forward of frame 10. Another passed beneath the destroyer Dale before slamming into the battleship North Carolina, blasting a geyser of water and oil high above its masts. By the time Wasp steadied from the impacts, flames were already spreading across the hangar deck, fed by ruptured aviation gasoline lines still full from recent flight operations. The situation had gone from alarming to catastrophic in less than 90 seconds, and the ship's most vulnerable point had been hit with perfect accuracy. The 3 torpedoes that tore into USS Wasp had struck at the worst possible location, directly beside the aviation gasoline storage, where thousands of gallons of fuel surged through open lines after the carrier's recent flight operations. Within seconds, the interior of the ship transformed from steel corridors and humming machinery into a maze of fire. Forward water mains had been severed by the explosions, leaving firefighters with nothing but extinguishers and desperate improvisation. As fuel-fed flames spread across the hangar deck, they ignited bombs, torpedoes, and ammunition still loaded on aircraft moments earlier. The carrier became a chain of detonations, a deadly echo of the Japanese carriers lost at Midway. Lieutenant Chester M. Stearns crawled through the choking darkness toward the hangar, guided only by the sizzling glow of burning metal. He emerged just in time to see a torpedo roasting under a burning TBF Avenger, its casing warping from the heat. Stearns threw himself flat on the deck an instant before it exploded, blowing a hole through the elevator pit so large that neither plane, torpedo, nor deck remained. The inferno intensified as aviation fuel poured from ruptured tanks, spreading across compartments and even igniting the water alongside the ship. Flames raced along the surface of the sea, licking at the carrier's hull and trapping crew trying to fight the fire from outside. Inside, the list increased to 15 degrees starboard as compartments flooded and ammunition detonated in rapid succession. Communication circuits had been destroyed, isolating the bridge from the inferno below. Officers struggled to coordinate efforts as blasts shook the ship, tearing through bulkheads and shredding internal passageways. Forward guns detonated when their ammunition cooked off, scattering debris across the length of the flight deck. At 3:05 p.m., Wasp suffered its most devastating blow yet. A massive gasoline vapor explosion erupted beneath the forward island, sending a column of flame 150 feet into the sky. The blast ripped a quadruple 1.1-inch anti-aircraft mount from its foundation and hurled it through the air, killing its entire crew instantly. Admiral Lee Noyes was thrown to the deck of his signal bridge, his face and scalp seared by the sudden wall of heat. Debris rained down across the carrier as men gathered aft, their only refuge from the inferno consuming the forward half of the ship. The hangar was lost, the machinery spaces were failing, and flames showed no sign of slowing. With water mains destroyed and gasoline feeding every inch of the vessel, USS Wasp was no longer a fighting ship. It was a burning pyre adrift in the Pacific. By 1520, Captain Forrest Sherman faced the hardest truth a commanding officer can ever confront. USS Wasp was beyond saving. The inferno had consumed the hangar, ruptured the fuel mains, severed communication lines, and blasted open entire compartments. Every minute brought new explosions. With flames racing aft and the ship listing dangerously to starboard, Sherman issued the only order left: abandon ship. The evacuation unfolded with startling discipline despite the chaos. Wounded men were carried first, their stretchers illuminated by flickering orange light as explosions echoed across the deck. Nearby destroyers, Laffey, Lansdowne, Helena, and Salt Lake City, closed in dangerously near the burning hulk, their crews lining the rails and scanning the water for survivors. At 3:05 p.m., a second massive blast had torn through the ship, but smaller detonations continued long after. Burning fragments rained down, and gasoline fires spread across the ocean's surface, forcing many men to swim underwater to escape the flames. Yet in the midst of horror, acts of quiet heroism multiplied. Sailors passing life vests to others, officers refusing rescue until their men were clear. By nightfall, 1,946 men had been pulled from the water. 45 aircraft went down with the ship, and 193 sailors lost their lives. A staggering toll, yet one that could have been far worse without the crew's discipline and the escort's determination. At 8 p.m., destroyers fired torpedoes into Wasp's ruined hull to ensure it would not be captured. At 9 p.m., the carrier rolled slightly to starboard, bow dipping beneath the waves, and vanished into the dark. The loss of Wasp forced Admiral Nimitz to overhaul carrier operations, ordering task forces to change their patrol zones frequently to avoid submarine ambushes. Decades later, in 2019, the research vessel Petrel found the carrier upright on the seabed at 14,255 feet, a solemn reminder of sacrifice and the unforgiving nature of the Pacific War. When we look back at the story of USS Wasp, it's easy to think of steel, explosions, and history written in smoke. But beneath all of that, there is a quieter truth, one that speaks directly to us, here and now. Wasp wasn't just a carrier. It was a floating community of nearly 2,000 souls who, in the face of chaos, instinctively chose courage over panic, discipline over fear, and sacrifice over survival. In the darkest moments, when the ship was burning, when the decks were collapsing, when the water itself was on fire, men still helped each other. Wounded sailors were carried first. Jackets were handed to those who needed them more. Officers refused rescue until their crews were safe. And even as the ship sank, no one was alone. The real lesson is this: we don't control the storms that hit us, but we do control who we become in the middle of them. Just like the men of Wasp, each of us will one day face something we never saw coming. A loss, a failure, a moment that knocks the breath out of us. And when it comes, we have a choice: to fall apart or to rise with the same quiet strength that sailors once showed aboard a dying ship. Hard times don't define us. How we carry each other through them does. If this story touched you or reminded you of a moment in your own life when someone stood by you, share it in the comments. Your experience might be the thing that helps someone else keep going. And if you want to journey with us through more stories of courage, sacrifice, and the forgotten chapters of history, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. Every new video is another step into the past and a reminder of what still matters today.